The bell at the Rotion gate gave a soft clang as it swung open, and sunlight spilled like molten gold across the white marble plaza of Arlington. The air was still, reverent, so quiet you could hear the flag's fabric sigh as it shifted on the breeze. Then came the sound that didn't belong. Boots. Heavy, swaggering boots. A man strode out from the crowd, massive, broad as a doorway. Draped in a skin-tight wrestling jacket glittering with rhinestones, he flexed his arms as he walked, each muscle popping like coiled steel. A ripple of uneasy laughter passed through the tourists. Cameras rose, just a few feet ahead. The tomb guard stood like a statue, polished boots, rooted to the marble, eyes locked forward. His dress blues caught the sun like carved obsidian, ceremonial rifle perfectly balanced on his shoulder. He didn't move. He didn't blink. The wrestler stopped inches from the black line painted on the plaza, the invisible boundary no one dared cross. He tilted his head, smirking. "Well, look at you," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Just stand in there all stiff. You think you're tough? You think standing still makes you strong?" No answer, no flicker of acknowledgement. The silence pressed heavier. The wrestler circled, boots echoing sharp against stone. "I've slammed men twice your size into the mat," he taunted, shadowboxing around the guard. "I've made monsters beg, and you can't even twitch." Tourists shuffled. Some snickered nervously. A small boy clutched his mother's hand, eyes wide. The guard stood as if carved from the earth itself. The wrestler's grin widened. He squatted low, arms out, and suddenly lunged forward with a sharp grunt, stopping just inches short of the guard's shoulder, pretending to grapple. A gasp rippled through the watching crowd. Nothing. Not a blink. Not a breath. It was as if time bent around the guard's stillness. Every molecule of movement outside him grinding to a halt. The wrestler stood upright again, shaking his head in disbelief. "You think you're untouchable," he said softly. Then louder, to the audience. "Watch this." He stepped back a pace, rolling his shoulders, preparing to charge. The crowd held its breath. They thought the guard would flinch, step aside, break, but they were about to see what true honor looks like. The world knew him only as the guard. No name, no expression, no sound, just precision steps and eternal stillness under the burning sun. But once, long before the polished shoes and pressed blues, he had been Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes, a soldier drenched in desert sand and smoke. A man who once roared into battle with fire in his eyes, years ago. Halfway across the world, Hayes had fought in a place that didn't exist on maps. He and his closest friend, Corporal Mason Lee, had been inseparable brothers in everything but blood. Mason carried the humor, cracking jokes even as mortar howled overhead. Hayes carried the weight, the quiet anchor who steadied their squad. Then came the night that rewrote him. Their convoy had been ambushed in a barren valley under a starless sky. Flames rose like claws from shattered Humvees. Mason was the first to push Hayes behind cover, and the last to rise again. A single flash, a sound like the sky itself breaking, and Mason was gone. Hayes dragged what was left of him through the burning wreckage, until his hands bled. He never spoke about it again, not once. When he came home, parades and applause only echoed hollow in his chest. He stopped laughing, stopped sleeping, until one day, passing through Arlington on a gray morning, he saw them, the tomb guards, moving like ghosts, perfect, flawless, silent. They didn't flinch. They didn't speak. They carried the weight. Hayes understood. And he knew this was where he belonged. He trained like a man possessed. Endless drills, one wrong blink and he'd start over. Hours under the sun without moving, without scratching, without wiping sweat from his eyes. Precision until the world blurred into the click of his heel and the steel of his gaze. A year later, he earned the badge. A black enamel wreath worn by fewer than 1,000 souls in all of history, and every step since had been for Mason. Far from Arlington's silence, the other man lived in chaos. Rex, the avalanche. Dalton had once been a living thunderclap in the wrestling world. Nearly 300 pounds of snarling charisma wrapped in neon tights. Crowds adored him. He would leap from the ropes like falling stone, crushing opponents and drinking in their cheers like fire. But fame, like muscle, fades when neglected. Injuries mounted. Younger stars eclipsed him. Sponsors vanished. One scandal followed another. A bar fight, a failed reality show, a viral video of him throwing a chair at a promoter. Soon, the only thing left was the persona. Loud, brash, untouchable, even if no one was watching anymore. Dalton hated silence. Silence meant being forgotten. And so when a small YouTube channel offered him a chance at a live stunt at a famous monument, he grabbed it like a lifeline. He didn't care where, didn't care who stood in his way. He only knew the cameras would be rolling again, and people would chant his name. To him, everything was performance. Respect wasn't given, it was taken, slammed down, pinned to the mat. Between these two men stretched an ocean of belief. Hayes saw the tomb as sacred ground, a place where every step weighed 100 years, a place where stillness itself was a weapon, a shield of discipline guarding the nameless dead. He polished his rifle each morning as though he were touching bone, speaking to ghosts through ritual. Dalton saw it as a stage, just white marble and bored tourists, a blank backdrop for his comeback. There was the true collision coming, not flesh against flesh, but meaning against ego. On the morning of the incident, Arlington seemed carved from sunlight and silence. The plaza shimmered white, framed by rows of dark cypress trees that swayed like watchful sentinels. Flags whispered on their poles. Tourists wandered softly, speaking in hushed tones as if afraid to disturb the dead. Hayes had been on post for 40 minutes. Sweat crawled down his spine beneath the stiff wool, but his face remained stone. Every click of his heel landed with the same clean finality as a drumbeat. This was the part of the day he loved most, when the world quieted, and he could almost hear Mason laughing somewhere beyond the wind. Dalton stood on the far edge of the crowd, hood pulled over his head, camera crew in tow. He watched the guards' measured steps with a curled lip. The crowd seemed mesmerized, leaning in to watch a man simply stand. Dalton couldn't comprehend it. All this for doing nothing, he muttered, cracking his knuckles. Let's see how still he stays when the avalanche hits. One of his crew members hesitated. Are you sure about this? People take this place real serious. Dalton smirked. Exactly. That's why they'll remember it. And with that, he strode forward, tearing off his hoodie to reveal the gaudy rhinestone jacket beneath. Gasps fluttered through the crowd as sunlight bounced off the sequins. Phones rose. Voices whispered. Hayes heard none of it. His gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, on a point that only he could see. Because for Hayes, this wasn't a performance, it was a promise, and he would keep it, even if the whole world tried to break him. Dalton's boots struck the marble like hammers. The rhinestone jacket caught the sunlight and scattered it across the white plaza as he swaggered forward, every movement loud, exaggerated, meant to be seen. His crew scrambled behind him, cameras up, red lights blinking. The crowd shifted uneasily. Conversations died off. Someone whispered, "Is this allowed?" Hayes didn't move. He had completed his last turn precisely 21 steps from the tomb. His left heel clicked down at the black line. He paused, pivoted, raised his rifle to his shoulder with mechanical grace, and began his return march. Each motion was flawless, fluid. Ancient. Dalton stepped directly into his path. The guard's polished toe came within inches of Dalton's scuffed boot before Hayes halted in perfect synchronicity, with the regulation drill as though the intrusion didn't exist, as though Dalton was smoke. The wrestler grinned, spreading his arms. "Ladies and gentlemen," he bellowed, "the mighty statue walks." A few uneasy chuckles fluttered through the crowd, but most remained silent. Parents tightened grips on their children. Phones rose higher. The heat grew heavier, like a held breath. Dalton leaned close, voice dropping low. "You can hear me, can't you, soldier boy? You ain't deaf. You're just playing pretend." No answer. Hayes' gaze remained locked downrange, as if the world around him had dissolved. Dalton circled him, boots squealing on the stone. "Look at you, all stiff and pretty. Got your shoes shined by angels. Tell me, how many hours a day you spend looking in the mirror?" Still nothing. Dalton barked a laugh. "Bet you ain't fought a real man in years. Just standing still like some kind of toy soldier." He clapped his massive hands together in a sudden thunderous crack. The sound made several children jump. Hayes didn't blink. A ripple passed through the crowd. Whispers, the subtle shift of weight as they drew closer, curious and uneasy. Dalton thrived on it. He could feel their attention gathering like static. He turned toward them, raising his arms. "This guy thinks standing still makes him strong. Me, I put people on the floor. I make em beg. Want me to show him what real strength looks like?" A few gasps. One man muttered, "This isn't a show." Dalton ignored him. He prowled back to Hayes, lowering his face inches from the guard's frozen stare. "Come on, flinch, blink, something. Are you even alive in there?" Hayes' jaw remained carved from granite. Dalton shifted tactics. He began mimicking the guard's march, stepping stiffly alongside him in mocking parody as Hayes reached the end of his measured route. Dalton exaggerated the click of his heels, saluted sloppily, puffed out his chest like a cartoon soldier. A ripple of laughter broke through the crowd, this time awkward, uncertain, as though they weren't sure if it was safe to laugh. Dalton grinned. They were warming to him. Hayes ignored the mimicry entirely. pivoting crisply, shouldering his rifle, beginning the return walk. Dalton shuffled backward to block him again. "Oh, he's got discipline," he jeered. "Guess what, champ? Discipline don't mean a thing when someone knocks your teeth out." A young boy in the front row tugged his father's sleeve. "Dad, why won't the soldier stop him?" The father's voice was tight. "Because that's not what they do." Dalton heard it and smiled wider. He began narrating each of the guards' movements in a mocking announcer's voice. "And here he goes, folks. The incredible left foot, followed by, wait for it, the right foot." He clapped and whooped. Unbelievable athleticism. A few of his crew snickered. The rest looked nervous, eyes flicking to the gathering park security on the plaza's edge. Dalton didn't care. The red light on the camera blinked like blood in his periphery. He was winning. The spotlight was back. Hayes reached his mark, pivoted again, the sound of his heel striking stone sharp and final. The rifle gleamed. His eyes remained distant, unreachable. Dalton planted himself directly in that line of march again, arms spread wide. "Come on, statue. What happens if I don't move? What then? Gonna stand there all day till you rust?" The crowd had gone fully silent now. Only the faint hiss of wind through the cypress broke the tension. Dalton leaned closer, voice dropping to a hiss. "Or maybe you're scared. Scared to break character. Scared you don't have anything else left." For a fraction of a second, something flickered behind Hayes' still gaze, not fear, not anger, but memory. A flash of a burning convoy, Mason's outstretched hand disappearing into smoke. Then it was gone. Dalton didn't notice. He was too busy winding himself up, feeding on the silence. He began doing push-ups directly at Hayes' feet, slamming his chest to the marble, shouting between reps, "This is strength." He leaped up, flexing, roaring like an animal. Sweat dripped from his jaw. Hayes' rifle remained perfectly level. Dalton stomped to the black line, just shy of the sacred boundary before the tomb. He towed it like a wrestler testing the ropes. "You got nothing behind those eyes," he spat. "You're just a mannequin with a gun." The crowd drew a collective breath, sharp, uneasy. Hayes shifted the rifle from shoulder to port arms in one fluid motion. The steel buttplate rang faintly as it struck his palm. His movements were still regulation perfect, but something in the air had changed. Taut, crackling, like a wire drawn to the breaking point. Dalton mistook it for weakness. He began circling again. Faster, sweat flinging from his skin, voice rising. "They say this place is sacred, but I say it's just stone. You hear me?" He slammed a palm against the plaza. "Just stone." A little girl whimpered. Her mother hushed her quickly. Dalton loomed behind Hayes' shoulder now, close enough to feel the heat radiating from the still figure. He lowered his voice to a taunting whisper. "Blink, soldier boy, or I'll make you." Hayes' eyes didn't move. Dalton's grin turned sharp. He straightened, rolling his massive shoulders, and barked toward the crowd. "All right, you wanted a show. Let's give M1. The tourists stood frozen, caught between fascination and horror. Some recorded, others stared wide-eyed, hands half raised as if to stop what was coming. Park security took hesitant steps closer. Radios raised, but none crossed the invisible line. This was federal ground, and the guard was technically still in control of it. Dalton stomped his boot once, the sound booming like a drumbeat. He squared his stance directly in Hayes' march path, chest heaving. "Last chance to move," he sneered. Hayes reached the end of his 21 steps, pivoted, click heel down, and began walking toward Dalton. The space between them seemed to contract with each echoing footstep, like time itself holding its breath. Dalton smirked, planting his feet, preparing to stand unmoving, determined to break the guard's perfect line. The air shimmered with heat. Cameras hummed. Children clung to their parents. Hayes kept coming, impossibly steady. Each step landed with the weight of centuries. Dalton's grin faltered just for a heartbeat, but he covered it with a growl, flexing his arms like coiled cables. There were two storms on a collision course, one loud, violent, and desperate, the other silent, relentless, and unbreakable. And when they met, the whole world would learn which one would give first. Dalton planted his boots at the exact center of the guard's path. The marble plaza seemed to hum beneath the weight of silence. Heat shimmered from the stone, curling around them like invisible fire. Hayes approached with machine precision, 21 steps of exact distance. Measured cadence, unbreakable rhythm. His shadow stretched long across the black line marking the perimeter of the sacred ground. Dalton's chest rose and fell like a bull's. "Do it," he muttered under his breath, teeth bared. "Come on, do something." The tourists were statues themselves now. Children clung to their parents' legs. Phones hovered, screens glowing like fireflies. Park security hovered on the periphery, unsure if they were seconds from stepping in or witnessing history. Hayes closed the last few feet. Dalton didn't move. The guard halted precisely at regulation distance. The toe of his boot aligned with Dalton's. He pivoted, bringing the M14 rifle from shoulder arms to port arms in one seamless flash of steel, barrel slanting upward across his chest. For a fleeting instant, they stood face to face. Hayes' eyes were calm oceans. Dalton's burned like oil fires. Dalton leaned in, breath hot and ragged. "You can't touch me, can you? That's the game. You stand there while real men live." Hayes' jaw didn't even tighten. Dalton smirked and shoved him. It wasn't a hard shove, more like a testing push. Just enough to break the sacred air between them, but it hit like an explosion in the silence. Gasps erupted from the crowd. A camera clattered to the stone. Someone shouted, "Hey, you can't do that." Hayes didn't move. His boots stayed rooted as if fused to the marble. Dalton's grin sharpened. "That's it, nothing. You are just a mannequin." Then he reared back to do it again, harder this time. Hayes moved. It wasn't wild or angry. It was surgical. The M14 snapped down from port arms in a blur, the gleaming steel buttplate stopping a breath from Dalton's chest with a crack like a gunshot. At the same instant, Hayes' left boot slammed forward, bridging the last inches between them. The movement was one continuous line of motion, perfect drill precision, repurposed into something primal. Dalton's body locked. The rifle butt hovered over his heart like a poised hammer. Hayes' voice tore the still air in a command honed by centuries. "Stand aside." It was thunder. It was a battlefield, erupting through a man's throat. Dalton actually staggered back half a step before catching himself. The crowd's gasp was a physical thing now, rippling outward. A child clapped her hands to her ears. Hayes didn't advance. He simply existed like an immovable wall of will, the rifle angled perfectly, one eye locked on Dalton's center mass, the other fixed on duty itself. Dalton's mouth worked soundlessly. His crew stood frozen, cameras trembling in their hands. The silence that followed was worse than the shout. It was absolute, a crushing, ancient stillness, like a cathedral after lightning. Dalton's chest heaved. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, and something cracked inside him. This man, this statue, had just stared into his chaos and not flinched, had taken his violence, his fame-hungry fury, and crushed it into nothing with one word. Dalton snarled to hide the tremor in his jaw. "You think that scares me?" Hayes said nothing. His rifle stayed poised, like judgment itself. Dalton lunged. It was a mistake born of panic, not strength, a desperate, clumsy attempt to reassert control. He swung one massive arm in a looping haymaker, telegraphed from miles away. Hayes flowed. He stepped diagonally off the line, rifle twisting in his grip, the bayonet lug flashing like silver lightning. His movement was silent, practiced, almost beautiful. Dalton's fist sliced through empty air in that same heartbeat. Hayes' boot planted behind Dalton's lead foot, and with a single pivot of his hips, he channeled Dalton's momentum forward. The world seemed to slow. Dalton's body left the marble in a sudden arc. The man who'd thrown bodies around rings for decades, who'd stood atop turnbuckles, roaring like a lion, was airborne, weightless, powerless. He struck the ground with a seismic crack, rattling the air. The crowd screamed. Phones jerked wildly to follow. Park security surged forward, and then froze when Hayes merely resumed standing. Dalton lay on his back, staring at the sky as if it had betrayed him. His breath wheezed ragged from his lungs. Shock dilated his eyes. Hayes stood a pace away, rifle held at port arms again, breathing steady, posture untouched. He did not pursue. He did not gloat. He simply stepped back onto his line and pivoted with metronomic grace. The contrast was unbearable. Chaos, thrashing on the floor, and absolute discipline walking away from it. Gasps became applause, hesitant at first, then roaring like a wave crashing on stone. A veteran near the back saluted with trembling fingers. Dalton rolled to his side, disoriented, humiliation blazing across his flushed face. He half rose, then met Hayes' gaze again. The guard's eyes didn't even flicker. Dalton sagged back to his knees. A voice cut through the noise. "Stay down." It was one of the security officers, firm and low. Dalton didn't argue. Hayes continued his route, each of his 21 steps landing with glacial certainty. His face revealed nothing, but deep behind the eyes something old stirred, not pride, not anger, just the quiet ache of memory. Mason's laugh in the barracks. The letter Hayes had folded so many times it had become soft as cloth. The oath he had sworn when he first stood before this tomb. Dalton had wanted to prove he was stronger. Hayes had shown him. and the world that strength wasn't motion. It was stillness that could withstand the storm, that as Hayes reached the black line again and pivoted, the plaza was electric with disbelief. Reporters were already speaking into their mics in hushed tones. Someone sobbed. Someone else whispered. He didn't break character, even for that. Dalton staggered to his feet, legs trembling. Security escorted him and his crew off the plaza quietly, firmly. Their cameras hung forgotten at their sides. Not one of them dared speak. Hayes marched on, immutable, eternal. The last thing Dalton saw before disappearing into the trees was the guard's white-gloved hand rising with perfect grace as he shouldered the rifle again. And then Hayes was gone to him, swallowed by ritual, by silence, by duty older than either of them. The world seemed to freeze, for one fleeting moment. The only sound was the wrestler's ragged breathing as he towered over the tomb guard, arms still suspended mid-air from the shove that had just landed. Dust motes floated lazily between them like drifting sparks, catching the harsh afternoon sun. The guard hadn't stumbled. He hadn't even blinked. His boots were rooted in place as if the stone beneath him had fused with his spine. Then the silence broke not with chaos, but with the soft metallic click of a rifle sling tightening. 4 other guards were suddenly there, flanking the unknown soldiers, tomb-like living statues come to life. Their ceremonial rifles swung across their chests in perfect, synchronized arcs, bayonets glinting. The sudden motion was so sharp, so clean, that the crowd collectively flinched. The wrestler froze with his mouth open. "Step away," one guard barked, voice low but carrying like a thunderclap over marble. The wrestler's grin faltered. "I was just step away." It wasn't loud, yet it crushed the air around them. Reporters had stopped filming the crowd. Now every lens zoomed tight on the guard's unflinching face. He hadn't moved an inch since the shove. His chin was still raised, eyes locked forward, jaw carved from iron. Only his right hand had shifted, hovering just above the ceremonial rifle at his side, not gripping it, just reminding the world he could. The wrestler's bravado crumbled. He tried to laugh, but it cracked in his throat. Okay, relax." Then, a voice cut through the tension, authoritative, booming, familiar. "At ease, soldiers. I'll handle this." A man in a crisp dress uniform strode out from the crowd, medals flashing. A 4-star general. His presence hit like a shockwave. The crowd gasped as they recognized him from national broadcast. He stopped between the tomb guard and the wrestler, pivoting slowly toward the would-be attacker. "Do you understand where you are standing?" the general said, his tone like gravel wrapped in steel. "This ground is not a stage. It is sacred." "I didn't mean," the wrestler stammered. "You touched a tomb guard." The general cut him off. "Do you know what that means? These men embody every soldier who never came home. They stand so the fallen are never alone. They stand when it's scorching, when it's freezing, when bullets are flying, and when people like you are mocking." The words slapped harder than any punch. The wrestler's face flushed crimson. "You will leave now," the general said, "or I will have you escorted in cuffs." There was no bluff in his eyes. The wrestler's chest heaved, his shoulders sagged, and then he stepped back, slowly. 1 step, 2, 3. He lowered his eyes, muttered something that might have been sorry, and melted into the crowd. Swallowed by silence, the general turned. And in one deliberate motion he faced the tomb guard, and snapped to rigid attention. His boots clicked like gunfire. His salute sliced the air with military perfection. For the first time all day, the guard moved. His gloved right hand rose, slow and precise, returning the salute with immaculate form. Not an inch out of line, not a breath wasted. Flashbulbs exploded. Reporters trembled to capture every millisecond. Then, as if nothing at all had happened, the guard lowered his hand, pivoted on his heel, and resumed his measured 21 steps before the tomb of the unknown soldier. Click 1, 2, 3. The crowd didn't dare breathe until he turned again. Then the sound hit like a dam breaking. A roar of applause, tears, salutes, hands over hearts. Some shouted "God bless you," while others just stood frozen, lips parted in awe. In that moment, the wrestler was forgotten. All that remained was the image, a lone guard, silent and unshaken, standing eternal watch while the world erupted around him. And for millions watching the live broadcast, that image said everything. Discipline will always outlast chaos. The plaza around the tomb was nearly empty now. The crowds had dispersed in hushed silence, as though leaving a cathedral after a sermon that struck too deep to speak about. The roar of applause had faded into echoes, swallowed by the slow rustle of flags and the twilight breeze. Only a handful of people remained: maintenance workers, packing cables, Two reporters murmuring near the steps, and a young boy clutching his father's hand. The boy's small voice floated softly into the cooling air. Was he a hero? The father, still staring at the guard pacing his perfect 21 steps, nodded without looking down. He already was, long before today. The boy's brow furrowed, but he fell silent, as if those words carried more weight than he could yet hold. Up at the platform, the tomb guard stood at his post exactly as he had from the beginning. The confrontation, the shove, the cameras, the general's salute, none of it lingered in his stance. He was motion itself, stripped of ego. 21 steps down, pivot. 21 steps back, pivot. The world might have seen him as a hero today, but in his mind nothing had changed. When his relief finally came, it was as ceremonious as always. The incoming guard approached with a crisp march, heels striking the stone like clockwork. They performed the changing of the guard ritual without a flicker of hesitation. Shoulders squared, rifles exchanged, inspection complete. The tomb was never left alone, not for a single heartbeat. And when it was done, the guard who had faced the wrestler gave a precise salute to his comrade, then turned and strode off the plaza in measured steps. Only when he had passed beyond the gates, away from the public's eyes, did his rigid posture soften just slightly. He stepped into the quiet of the locker room, a world apart from the roaring silence outside, and removed his immaculate gloves. His fingers trembled faintly, not from fear, from restraint finally allowed to loosen. He sat on the bench and reached into the breast pocket of his coat. A small, dented dog tag lay inside, worn smooth around the edges. He rolled it between his thumb and forefinger as if it were a worry stone. Caleb, his best friend, the one who had bled out in his arms in a foreign desert a lifetime ago, the one who had talked about becoming a tomb guard someday, who believed in silence and dignity when others only believed in survival. I stood, brother, he whispered, voice barely audible even to himself. I stood like you said we should. He closed his eyes. The roar of applause and gasps and cameras faded into the memory of rotor blades and sandstorms. For a few seconds he wasn't standing before the world. He was 20 again, clutching Caleb's hand under a dying sun, promising he'd never let their brothers be forgotten. A soft knock broke the moment. A figure filled the doorway, the same 4-star general who had intervened, but now out of the public eye. His face had softened into something like quiet pride. Guard, the general said simply, you held the line today. The guard rose and stood at attention. The general didn't salute this time. Instead, he placed a single folded note on the bench and walked away, boots echoing down the corridor. When the guard opened it, there were just 7 words, scrawled in precise block letters. Stillness is strength. You proved it. He folded the note carefully, slipped it next to Caleb's tag, and exhaled slowly, then stood straighter than ever. Asterisk, the world moves fast. People shout, chase, shove their way through each day as if noise alone could make them powerful. But every so often, the world stops and watches a single figure who does none of that, a figure who stands. That day at the tomb of the unknown soldier, millions watched a man try to make himself bigger through aggression. They saw him mock, shove, and posture, and they saw how little that mattered when faced with something he could not move: principle. The tomb guard did not fight back. He did not raise his voice. He did not defend himself with anger, because he wasn't there for himself. He was there for the nameless, for the fallen, for those whose stories ended in silence and sacrifice. And in standing for them, he showed the world what real strength is. It's not in force. It's not in fame. It's in discipline. It's in stillness. It's in refusing to abandon your duty even when no one is clapping, even when the whole world tries to push you off your path. That's why a general saluted. That's why a child whispered hero. And that's why for years to come, people will remember the sight of a guard resuming his measured steps as if nothing had happened, because to him, nothing had. He was simply doing his duty. So when you face the noise and chaos of your own world, remember him. Remember the soldier who did not move. Tradition is not weakness. Stillness is strength. If this story moved you, share it. Remind others what honor looks like. Because sometimes, the greatest battles are not fought with force but with the courage to stand your ground.